Thanks for the opportunity to present some work that the CSIR is doing on quantifying the water use of crops and trees in South Africa. So the title of my talk is More Crop Per Drop, Improving Our Knowledge on Crop Water Requirements for Irrigation Scheduling. And we're going to actually be moving a little bit beyond irrigation scheduling, looking at the land uses such as forestry and alien invasive plants as well. So I just appreciate the opportunity, and also like to acknowledge my co-authors on this paper, David Lemaitre, Seb Zakiti, and Niba Jovanovic, who I work with. So we all know the importance of food security to any nation, and food security is very closely linked to water security, as you know, particularly in an agriculturally dependent country like South Africa. And yet we are also experiencing increasing pressure on our water resources. This is from population growth, from economic growth, from aspects to do with water quality. And because of this, we know that the social economic importance of agriculture and forestry to this country is very, very high in terms of gross domestic product, job creation, value addition, and so on. And this sector utilizes a significant proportion of the water in the country, and I'll just elaborate on that a little bit later. But if we factor in the water use of, say, invasive alien plants as well, we know that the impacts are really, really high. Quantifying the water use of alien invasive plants and crops and trees is a difficult thing. Nevertheless, given the water availability challenges faced by the country, we must acknowledge the need to use our water wisely by improving water use efficiencies in the country and reducing non-beneficial water use. And I'll just be talking a little bit about that as we go on. So the principal message that I want to convey here is that to be able to manage, we need to be able to measure. And we need to understand how much water do these crops and trees use, and how can we best use that knowledge to manage our water resources in the country. So if we look at this chart, we'll see that irrigated agriculture and forestry use the largest portion of the water pie in South Africa. In excess, actually, of 60% of the water in the country is allocated to agriculture and forestry, and that's a huge proportion. And so if we're going to target any particular sector in terms of improving efficiencies in water use, this is the sector to target. There's also a strategy by the irrigation strategy of South Africa that aims to increase irrigated land in South Africa by 50%. So if our water resources are already pretty much 100% allocated, and they want to add an additional 50% to the irrigated land in South Africa, the only way that we are actually going to be able to do that is by increasing the efficiencies with which agriculture uses water. Because it's with the assumption that the amount of water allocated to agriculture will remain the same in the future. So we need substantial improvements in water use efficiency, and plantation forestry is also a significant user of water in South Africa. So although it's very useful in terms of timber and fiber production, we have to just factor in the impact of the plantations on water as well. Furthermore, the ongoing spread of alien invasive plants also reduces water availability in the country. And so how can we best understand and address these challenges in the most effective way? I think collecting good quality data is an excellent start. And from a technical perspective, direct in-field measurements are really useful. They monitor and quantify water use very accurately, and they help us understand the water use of these different land use covers. So the technique that I just want to briefly go through, one of two techniques, is called the heat pulse velocity technique, which we use extensively in the field. It essentially uses heat as a tracer. So in any stem of a tree, if you look at the cross-section of a tree, you've got the sapwood around the outside and the heartwood in the middle. And the sapwood is the water conducting area of the tree, and that's the part that we're interested in. And we drill 3 holes in the tree, little 5 millimeters apart, 1.8 millimeter holes in the tree, and we insert thermocouples above and below a heater probe, which is in the middle. And we essentially use heat as a tracer. So we inject a pulse of heat into the tree, and we measure how rapidly the movement of the sap in the tree transports that heat up through the tree. And the time it takes for that pulse of heat to move from the heater up to the thermocouple gives us an indication of how fast the sap or the water is moving through the tree. And this in turn helps us to calculate the actual water use of the tree if we multiply it by the cross-sectional area of sapwood. We also take into account wounding that's caused by the drilling procedure, wood density, and sapwood moisture content. And we insert our probes into different depths into the sapwood to measure the velocities as they change radially across the sapwood. And then we integrate all those values, and we come up with daily estimates of water use. In fact, hourly estimates of water use, which we can then total for the days and for the hours and for the year. The advantage of the system is that it can run 24/7, 365 days a year, so we can actually sum water use of these trees very, very accurately. The second measurement technique I would like to just talk about briefly is the eddy covariance technique. This measures the water use of an entire forest canopy or orchard, depending on where you put your equipment up. You usually mount it on top of a tower because we have to get the equipment above the canopy. And it measures turbulent eddies of air that rise up above the vegetation, and those are important drivers of water and vapor exchange. And to be able to quantify what the water use of the vegetation is, we need to measure all the components of the energy balance equation, which you see here in red. So we've got net radiation, soil heat flux, sensible heat flux, and latent heat flux. And the latent heat flux term of the equation represents how much energy is going into evaporating water from the vegetation. This is the amount of energy that's available from the sun. This is how much is being absorbed by the soil. This is how much is being just used to heat up the air and the plants themselves. So the balance is used directly for evaporative purposes, and that's what we want to quantify through this equipment. So we've got a whole series of instruments that measure all these different components of the energy balance equation, and we can either derive energy balance closure, or we can calculate reference latent heat of evaporation by subtraction, by measuring all the other terms in the equation. The system needs some additional measurements, particularly soil moisture values in the soil, as you can see down here. A very, very accurate weather station is vital to also interpreting the data. And things like irrigation applications into the orchards and leaf area index of the orchards or the trees is an important additional measurement that needs to be taken. So if we just look at measurements themselves, it's impossible, obviously, to measure everywhere. You can't measure everywhere. And we have to extrapolate our field measurements with modeling. And this is an effective way of just widening our estimates to greater scales and perspectives. And modeling techniques that are available include the crop factor approach, such as the FAO 56 approach, multiple source water use models, where we account for the transpiration component of the trees and the evaporation that's coming off the inter-row crop, for example. And these processes are driven by input variables, principally solar radiation, but also temperature, humidity, wind speed, vapor pressure deficit. And it's important to obviously account for phenological changes in the orchards or the canopy of the crop as well, because as you can see from these two pictures, the winter and the summer situation in the orchards are entirely different. So we take all those measurements into account and in the model, and it allows us to extrapolate our measurements to wider areas. Remote sensing methods are also becoming more commonly used in water resources management and for estimating total evaporation over much wider scales. And examples of these include the surface energy balance algorithm for land, which is also called CBAL, or MODIS 16 approaches, or SEBS is another a model that uses remotely sensed data. And the advantage is that they give a very, very wide spatial overview of how evapotranspiration rates can vary across the country relative to land use. And we can start linking up evapotranspiration rates with specific land uses and drawing correlations there. But it's also obviously very critical to ground truth and to establish confidence in the data that we're getting from these remote sensing models. And so this is an image that just shows a number of sites across the country where the CSIR has attempted to ground truth actual remotely sensed estimates of evapotranspiration using field data that's collected in the field itself. So that's obviously an important aspect. A number of research projects have run by the CSIR have quantified and continue to quantify the water-related impacts associated with different land uses. And I wanted to just focus on a few of those, and we're going to start with irrigated agriculture. So if you look at this nice image of an apple orchard growing in the Western Cape, this is the Kowa region, just close to Ceres. And you'll see these apple orchards next to a farm dam. This is, of course, the winter rainfall area, so it's a Mediterranean climate and very, very wet and get all their rainfall in winter and very hot and dry in summer. And so it's very important for the farmers, obviously, to get good full dams in the winter when they replenish all their water supplies, because they're very, very dependent on that in the summer to irrigate the crops. To be able to do that most effectively and most efficiently, the farmers need really accurate information on what the crop water requirements of those orchards are. And so if we can provide the best possible information on that, they can start looking at where they can improve efficiencies and how they can minimize the wastage of water and irrigate as effectively and efficiently as possible. And this is not only going to save them water, but it's also going to save them electricity, because you need substantial electricity to drive the pumps to pump the water. So there's a twofold benefit to them increasing efficiencies there. To start addressing this knowledge gap, the CSIR obtained funding from the Water Research Commission for a nice long 7-year project looking at the water use of fruit tree orchards. And this map just shows rainfall distribution across South Africa in terms of its seasonality, in terms of summer rainfall and winter rainfall regions and sort of all year round rainfall. And the project set out to measure the water use of fruit crops in different areas, different climatic areas around the country. So we started with peaches up in Rustenburg. Those are Valencia oranges in Groblersdal. Pecan nuts in Cullinan. Nectarines and apples in the Western Cape, in Wellesley and Ceres. Valencia oranges down in Citrusdal, and also in the Western Cape, and at Malalaan. And macadamia nuts just outside White River. So those were the study sites that we used to measure the water use of all those different fruit tree orchards and try to get a handle on what these orchards actually use. And this kind of study looking at such a wide range of fruit tree orchards has never been done before in South Africa, and to such an intense degree. The two techniques that I mentioned earlier, the heat pulse velocity technique and the eddy covariance technique, were both used to quantify the water use of these orchards. So results from the project we used to calculate crop factors for each of these orchards. Now you can see the different crop factor graphs for the respective orchards, and you can see that they do vary quite significantly. Some of them, particularly the apple orchards that are deciduous and have a distinct summer growing season, have a very, very distinct peak in the summer and dropping down around May and June, and are dormant through the winter. The nectarines, interestingly, had an early summer season peak and then a drop off after the harvesting, which is around November and December, and then picked up again slightly and then dropped off again down to the winter. Other crops are more consistent. The macadamias, quite consistent, and the citrus actually had a drop in the crop factor values over the summer. So these crop factor values basically allow you to calculate the water requirement of a fruit tree orchard under a given set of climatic conditions, and they can allow the data to be extrapolated to wider areas. This graph in the middle just shows in red what we measured from these field experiments and what previous estimates had provided in terms of the water use of these different fruit tree orchards. And you can see there's quite a lot of variability, and so I believe that we've tried to bring some stability to those estimates previously, which are not entirely based on field measurements, and allow us to derive more accurate crop factors so that we can project on a wide scale what the... That was just to wake you up. I hope it worked. What the water requirements of these different orchards are. So some interesting results from the study. If we look at just one example for the Pink Lady apples from the apple orchard, a 14-year-old Pink Lady apple tree transpires approximately 20 to 30 liters per day, a single tree, up to a maximum of 42 liters per day. And over the growing season, this adds up to about 4,000 liters of water per tree per year. That means, if you take the yield of the orchard into account, that it takes approximately 27 liters of water to produce one apple. And that is about 170 liters per kilogram of apples, which you may think is a lot, but if you look at the pecan nuts in Mpumalanga, each tree there used over 200 liters of water per day, or 54,000 liters of water per season. And that means it takes 5,000 liters of water to produce a kilogram of pecan nuts. So
you really start getting a feel for, okay, what is the efficiency of the water in terms of the production required, the amount of water required to produce the end product. So how can we use these values to improve water use efficiency? Well, if we look at this graph over here, which has got accumulated rainfall and irrigation applications on the y-axis, and accumulated tree water use, which we actually measured in the field on the x-axis, in an ideal situation, you would expect this line to basically follow the one-to-one line. In other words, every litre of water that's being applied to the orchard is being used by the tree and there's no wastage. What we're finding is that at the end of the season, the amount of water that's actually applied to the orchard starts increasing relative to what's actually being used by the orchard. So there's a bit of excess water being applied to the orchard in this particular time of year, and it's because the trees are going into their dormancy, they're starting to lose their leaves, and their phenology is slowing down, so they don't need as much water. And this kind of area is where the farmers can actually save some water. And that's the kind of information that we're trying to understand better to improve the efficiencies. Then if we move on to forests and plantations, this is a typical sort of forestry scenario where you've got on the south-facing cooler slopes, nice patches of indigenous forest, and also in the riparian zones here near the streams. And you've got areas that were formerly under grassland, or if you're in the Western Cape, it would be fynbos. And those have been planted up to commercial pine plantations in this case, and sometimes eucalyptus plantations, which you can see here. And essentially what you're doing is you're transforming the landscape. You're taking seasonally dormant, shallow-rooted, low-leaf area plants, which is, in other words, the grassland that was here, and replacing that with evergreen, deep-rooted, high-leaf area trees. And that change in vegetation structure means there's more capacity to evaporate water out of the soil profile into the atmosphere. And so the more you are releasing to the atmosphere through evapotranspiration processes, the less is available for streamflow. And so changes in evapotranspiration rates directly relate to changes in streamflow availability. And that's also what we try to understand through this work. So there have been some generalized curves that have been produced from data that's around the world, which allow you to calculate for a given mean annual precipitation evapotranspiration rates that are linked either to a grassland cover or to a forest cover. And you can see this is the change in evapotranspiration rates. If you change then from a grassland to a forest cover, you've got this jump in evapotranspiration rates, and that's going to equate to reductions in streamflow that are going to result from those areas that are planted. Thank you. If we move on now to streamflow reductions, that again, long-term data that's shown that over a 35-year period, areas that are planted to commercial pine plantations reduce streamflow relative to a control catchment, which is the blue line over here. This is an area in Cathedral Peak, a long-term research catchment in Cathedral Peak, where progressive afforestation treatments were applied to the treated catchment, and you can see how the streamflow, this is accumulated streamflow on this axis, declined relative to the control over the time. So again, data that's used to quantify the impacts of different land covers. On the other hand, results are also showing that indigenous tree species use substantially less water than introduced plantation trees. And this is some data that's just coming out in a Water Research Commission project that's due to be published soon on the water use efficiency of indigenous tree species relative to introduced tree species. And so these findings have a wider scale applicability in eco-hydrological applications, forest restoration, erosion control, replacement of alien invasive species, and multiple use indigenous tree woodlots, particularly where water conservation is a priority. Turning now to alien invasive plants, I think we're all aware of the Working for Water program and it's now called Natural Resource Management Program, and their efforts to eradicate alien invasive plants from around the country. This is good work, and it's really important for augmenting the streamflow and the water resources in the country. And there's been some studies that have tried to establish what are the range of densities of these alien invasive plants across South Africa, and you can see there's quite a substantial variation. And then similarly, what are the reductions in mean annual runoff caused by these different densities of alien invasive plants across the country? And it's quite substantial. The total condensed area of invasive alien plants is approximately 1.5 million hectares, which results in a total mean annual runoff reduction of 1,444 million cubic meters of water per year, which is 2.9% of the mean annual runoff of the country, or
97 millimeters across the country per year. So it's really a significant impact on the water resources, and the ongoing clearing of these alien invasive plants is a priority. We found that the invasions are mostly in the Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal and Mpumalanga, and the most affected biomes are forests, grasslands, and the Indian Ocean coastal belt. Clearing of alien invasive plants is ongoing, and that's really good for augmenting streamflow resources, and also for job creation and little spin-off industries that can come from the products that are actually released by these clearing operations. And again, we've got really nice data to show that if you look at accumulated streamflow relative to accumulated rainfall, this is for a small catchment in KwaZulu-Natal. Under a stable land use, you would expect there would be a trend along this one-to-one line where as you get amounts of rainfall, so you get equivalent amounts of streamflow, and it would be quite a stable relationship. And that's evidenced by these blue dots over here, which is before the catchment was cleared. This is a catchment that was planted up entirely to Acacia mewenzii, or black wattle. Then the riparian zone was cleared over here, and the red dots show there's a dramatic increase in streamflow relative to rainfall from clearing the riparian zone. And then when the rest of the catchment was completely cleared of trees, again, a significant jump in streamflow relative to rainfall from that clearing operation. And we can quantify what the streamflow augmentation quantities are from these clearing operations, and try to help the Working for Water program prioritize where it needs to clear and what the benefits of its clearing are. So where do we go from here? We need ongoing field measurements and modeling to get as accurate data as possible to help in water resource management. We need to use the data. As Colleen said, you can't just throw it over the wall. We need to make sure that it gets incorporated into models that predict, okay, what are the water resource impacts of these different land uses. We need to improve our efficiencies by applying this data. We need enhanced monitoring in terms of water meters, reduced transmission losses, solving leaks on canals and pipelines, because those are still a significant issue in South Africa. We need increased use of groundwater for irrigation. It's quite an underutilized resource. And we need ongoing removal of the invasive alien plants to be able to augment the stream flow in a consistent way. And we need to apply the new technologies that are coming out for precision agriculture, which is monitoring of water use using remote sensing or real-time or online irrigation scheduling. So those are just some of the things that we can move into from here. So in conclusion, I think the evidence is there that agriculture can and must become more efficient in its water use. And this is really strongly promoted by the National Water Resource Strategy, which was published a couple of years ago. However, it requires accurate data on crop and tree water use. It requires the improved modeling to extrapolate those field measurements to wider scales. It requires the application of this understanding, and it requires the full value-added benefit of agriculture to be realized in South Africa, so that we can improve not only the amount of crop that we get per drop, but also the number of jobs that we generate per litre of water that's being used by a particular crop. And also as an environmental indicator, I just call it frogs per drop, what the environmental implications are of this water use. So there have been a number of organizations that have funded this research over the years, and I just want to acknowledge their grateful, not just their contribution gratefully, particularly the Water Research Commission, Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, Department of Environmental Affairs, and also colleagues in the CSIR and students, and obviously the landowners and managers that have allowed us to work on their land. Thanks very much.